Hi patrons, welcome back to the second part in this tutorial series. In the first part we worked on the face of this Jon Snow portrait, and so now we're going to be working on, in this part, we're going to be working on the clothing, so this furry cloak that he's wearing, the furry coat. And so because it's fur, this is going to be a very good technique if you ever want to draw animals with fur, so you can use this technique as well. And I am using and trying out a new set of pencils in this series. I'm trying out the Lumograph, these ones, the Lumograph, Mars Lumograph black pencils, as well as one Faber-Castell graphite pencil. So I'm going to be going in firstly with my 8B graphite pencil, and I'm using this firstly to get in any of the darkest areas. So I'm going to continue on from this beard, and you can see that there's a very big dark shadow that goes quite far into this cloak. So what I'm going to do is first outline where we need to shade in. So we're going to shade, basically do an outline very lightly so we know where we need to shade the 8B pencil in. Otherwise it's very easy to get lost, but if you do an outline it will stop you from shading too much or not shading enough. So it goes all the way into here. I know this because I included it in my sketch outline, any of the main shadows, which by the way is attached with the reference if you want to follow along. Okay, so I've shaded out that main shadow. There's going to be little bits of highlight within this area, but for now I'm going to just add a layer of 8B all the way along here. Pretty much just using the side of the pencil. You can go over that outline so we haven't got a really harsh outline, but keep it in that general area. I'm not applying much pressure at all, just enough to get a layer down. We do not want to get it as dark as it needs to be yet. Okay. I'm going to add some more layers right over by the face, in this area where it's the darkest. So any areas that are jet black, you can apply more of the layers using the 8B pencil. But any areas that have got different values within, you can see little bits of fur. I'm just going to be pretty much just using a light base layer to start with. So just shade extra on the darkest areas. Okay, and now I'm going to go in with my cotton bud. We're using cotton buds to blend, and I'm just going to blend this out. Just blend over this whole area. And even onto the areas next to it, which look lighter. This gets rid of all of the white grain. And now I'm going to move on to another section. This shadow has a little pause and then continues further down. I'm going to basically do this for all of the darkest areas. just add a base layer. Just underneath the beard as well, this shadow continues. This is very dark, so I'm applying lots of pressure now for this shadow. I'm going to go back over to this area that we're working on. Got a lot of these lighter areas, and I'm going to show you in a minute how we're going to do them, because we're not going to be adding much direct pencil onto those areas. It's going to be a bit of a different technique than what we've been doing for the rest of this portrait. So we've got some dark shadow up here. I'm just looking at the direction, very much like the hair, looking at the direction these bits of fur are going in. How are they curving with the coat? You can see that there's a lot of white and black strands of fur, so we're just loosely getting in some of the black ones for now. It's quite loose and messy. Lots of strands of fur going in different directions. Remember not to get too much pencil onto our snow areas, though. We can lighten it up like we did with the hair afterwards. So there are sections of snow that are coming down over the coat, and in the last part we covered over them when we did the hair, and then we used the kneaded eraser to lighten them up at the end. So we can do that again if we need to. So the key to doing this coat is we want to add lots of layers. So you can see that I am just working around, I'm jumping around the coat, and I am just doing lines. They're not really, really dark. I'm just basically getting a feel for the general direction of all of the different sections of fur. I'm not going too much over these lightest areas. Like I said, we're going to be using something slightly different on them, different technique. So it's very shadowed right by this lightest area. So I'm not really adding more pressure, but I am doing more strands of the fur next to each other, less of a gap. Make sure you've got them going in the general direction, but then you do a few to break it up to give it more of a messy look. I'm just adding a little bit of detail around this area so that it's not just a harsh cut-off point. Adding some little bits of fur going into the lightest areas just to transition a bit more. Okay, so now that we've got in all of the darks, we've worked our way around the coat, I do want to add a few more just up here. But we're going to be adding many layers to this. I'm going to go over the top with my cotton bed and just blend up. Actually, I'm going to switch over to a bit of tissue and just blend this, and I'm just blending it all around, not just on those darker shadows, all around. And you can see how we're toning even this lighter area. And you may think, why are we doing that if they're really light? But I'll show you in a second. And this is going to give us really realistic results quite quickly. It's quite an easy way to get really realistic looking fur, I think. Even though we're blending over it, you can still see all the details of the fur. So I'm going to add one more layer using our 8B pencil. So I'm going to go back in, start to add some more bits of fur. It's all about layering when you're trying to get realistic looking fur. You can't just do one layer. I'm even starting to add some fur marks over this really dark area. Even though it's hard to see direction the fur's going in, I am also applying more pressure. But I mainly want to use fur strokes so that we do get lighter bits showing through, because in this darker area there's still some lighter bits that peep through. So if we were just to shade it in circular motions, we wouldn't have any of that. Whereas when we do fur strokes, we do have lighter bits peeping through. If you feel like your pencil's getting a bit too blunt, then make sure you keep sharpening it. Otherwise you're going to have really fuzzy lines. Mine will need to be sharpened in a minute. I really need to darken up this section. It's very dark down here as well, so I'm just shading that in. Using a lot of pressure, going and adding some little fur strokes. And it might not look like much now, but as we start to really progress and add more and more layers and use the eraser in a minute, it's really all going to come to life. Adding some little bits of darker fur going into this lighter area. So now I'm going to go in with the 2B and just shade this over this area down here, which isn't very highlighted, but it's not quite as dark as the 8B. So very much what I did for this area earlier on in the first part, where there's any snow dots that are slightly lighter, I just shade over them with a bit of the 2B. You can also go in and start to add some bits of fur with this, some more mid-toned bits of fur. You don't just have to use the 8B, adding some with this as well will give more of a variety. I'm going to shade some of this 2B just over these darkest areas to tone the light bits in between the fur. And now we're going to switch over to using our eraser. So we're using our Tombow Mono Eraser. I'm going to cut the end off so we've got a nice clean edge to work with. And we're going to be using this firstly on our highlighted areas to add little strands of fur, because we've toned it using our cotton bud and smudged some value in. So now we can lighten up and create our highlighted bits of fur by adding some fur marks over the top using our Tombow Mono Eraser. This is going to give more of a layered look. Even adding some highlights throughout the rest of the fur. Mainly at the moment just sticking to these highlighted areas though. There's little bits of snow as well, quite a bit of snow on the coat. So I am going to go in with the eraser as well and start to get in some of these by applying quite a lot of pressure, just so we know where they are. And some lighter bits of fur within the dark area, this darkest area. You can see that already that's looking a lot more realistic. There's quite a lot of snow falling over the cloak in this section, making sure my snow is going in the right direction because it's all sort of falling in the same direction. You can blend over some of those bits of snow to make them not so harsh. And I'm going to go in with my 2B just to shade in this area because that's not too light. Going to go in with a bit of 6B just around the edges, just to darken it up. And wipe away all of the extra bits. Now I'm going to go back to using the 2B and I want to create some more detail within these highlighted areas. So I'm going to go in and just focus on a few parts that have a bit more shadow to them to really make the brightest areas pop by just adding some shadow surrounding them. Quickly going to go back in with my Tombow Mono Eraser Just start to add some highlighted bits of fur, then going back over with my 2B. I want to shade in this area. And down here, this area is quite dark. I want to add a few more highlights within this area. And I do want to go in my 8B and make some final, add some final deeper shadows, and then we'll move on to the other side. Okay, so now let's move on to this other side. Now that I'm happy with how this is looking, we're going to repeat the same process over on this side. And I'm not going to be changing up the process really at all. I've actually decided that with this other side, I'm going to approach it slightly differently, only very slightly. And the thing that I'm going to do differently is I'm first going to start by using the 2H pencil to lightly get in the fur for the lightest areas. And the reason why I'm doing this is because I've smudged a bit of graphite on this side. So some of my initial sketch outlines have been like erased, I can't really see them anymore. So I decided that I'm going to get in the lighter areas first, so that when I'm doing my darkest areas, I don't accidentally go over the light areas, if that makes sense. But you can do it the same as the other way. I just want to do it just so I can make sure that I'm getting in the lighter areas first, so I know what areas to avoid with my darker pencils. So I am using the 2H pencil for this because it will blend out very nicely and is very easy to erase as well. And I'm just going throughout the whole of the lightest areas and just adding our first strokes. For these areas, I'm going a bit darker than it needs to be because again, we'll be using the Tombow Mono Eraser in the exact same way as before. I just want to establish where these lighter areas are. I'm being fairly light with this pencil. It is just to block everything in. Like I said, there is a lot more of this lighter fur than on the other side. This process won't take too long though. And I'm not being exactly the same as the reference, I'm basically looking for the general clumps. But it doesn't matter if you're the tiny bit off. We'll leave the bits of snow until the end to do. Worked out nicely last time and with the hair, so I'm just going to repeat that with this side. So now that I've got the main areas in, that's all I wanted to do. And now we're going to return to our original process by using the 8B pencil to now get in the fur for these darker areas, starting at the top, working my way down to avoid smudging as much as possible at this stage. So once again, I'm looking for the direction the fur is going in. And we're starting off nice and lightly for the moment. The areas that are more dark haven't got as much like white bits showing through them. I'm layering my fur strokes closer together to give that darker look. Any areas with bits of white fur in between, I'm leaving gaps to create the look of that lighter fur. So there's some of the shadow by the ear. This is quite a dark area. It's got some little lighter bits showing through, and then it's transitioning into this highlighted area. So we need to make sure not to apply too much of this 8B pencil to this area. This area here is quite dark, so I'm just going to start to shade in the 8B. I'm jumping around quite a lot, as you can see. I really am just shading in areas at the moment, trying to get a feel for where the darker values are. I will be adding the fur strands on top. It's very dark towards this centre area, so let's shade some more of the 8B pencil. And in the corner over here. Okay, so as you can see, we've got in where our darker values are. Now I want to start to add a bit more fur stroke rather than shading it in. We will need to add in more pressure to certain areas because obviously these areas are very, very dark, so I do need to go and add some more shading now that we've got everywhere in and we're happy with our placement of our shadows. But that's why we do it light to start with, in case we do make any errors and we need to change anything. So I rarely make like big mistakes, and that is because I try to prevent them at all costs. So to prevent getting massive mistakes that it's really, really hard to fix, go very slow and steady and add more shadow slowly rather than doing it as dark as it needs, well, really, really as dark as it can be to start with, and then realise that something's not right. I like to get everything blocked in, and then once I'm happy with it and nothing looks really strange, then I go and fix and darken everything. So that would be a tip to avoid making mistakes. Just go slowly, very slowly. And then once we've done this, we're going to do the same thing of going in with our tissue and blending over the whole thing to add some more value to these lightest areas. Even down here within this lighter areas, there's still quite a lot of black bits of fur, some darker bits of fur. Layer in some darker layers of the 8B, adding more pressure to get them in. So take your time when you're doing this, you don't want to rush it. Keep looking through your drawing, see if there's any areas. For example, this shouldn't be lighter, it needs to be the same value. So I need to darken that up. And this area here is lighter, but there is a shadow below it. And then it goes into another highlighted area. So keep checking back on areas you've already done because you may have missed something. I do all the time. I always miss stuff. So I need to go back and just keep checking. Going in circular motions to get in this darkest area. So we've got this shadow in that goes all the way up here, just darkening up a few areas around it. We need to add a bit more shadow down here. Okay, now looking up from here, we do have some shadow round about at this point, so let's just darken that up. And then by the ear it's quite dark as well, so just darken that up even more. So now I am going to go in with my tissue and just blend over this whole thing, smooth it all out, just like last time. And I'm going to switch over to my eraser. And we're going to start off by pulling out these highlights. So in the same way as before, really focusing on the direction they're going in and how thick the clump is, the section. Getting in a few lighter bits of fur down here. And some of these areas are slightly lighter, but they're not white, so we will need to darken them up in a minute. But for now I want to get in all of the lightest bits of fur. So now that we've got in those lighter areas, I want to go back in and start to add in more detail with our dark pencils. But first I want to go in with my 2B and use this to add more detail within the highlighted areas. Especially for the highlights that aren't like just white. Like down here. They are slightly lighter, but they're not always white. Mainly I'm looking at the roots of each section where it is slightly darker. Adding some darker bits of fur throughout this area as well. Now I'm going to go in with my 6B pencil, start to get in more of these shadows. You can use the 8B as well, but this is also very dark and I don't want to sharpen my 8B pencil yet. And also this will help get more of a variety because it will be slightly lighter. So focus on shading in these darker values. Get them as dark as they need to be. And I'm going to switch over now to the 8B, just give it a quick sharpen, and then we'll darken everything up. So I'm going to start at the top and work my way down. I want to get everything as dark as it needs to be at this stage. Just getting all of those darks. Getting more of like the individual messy fur look. We will add the bits of snow at the end, like I said. But for now I just want to focus on getting in these dark shadows. Going further down by the ear now. Get that in. And I am pressing really hard on this pencil. I'm looking just at the shadows that we've already got. It should be quite easy because we've already got in all of the shadows. Now it's just about going in and darkening them up. At the moment it all looks very uniform, like it's going in a very uniform direction. So I'm adding bits of fur as well, going in different directions to break it up. Bringing this shadow further in. I'm going to shade in some more of this 8B along this side. To me, it doesn't feel like I've got enough of that on there. I don't feel like we've got a laid look to the fur yet. So this shadow does continue all the way up. I'm going to go in with my 2B and just shade over some of these areas that need to go a bit darker, but nowhere near as dark as the 8B. Like some of these highlights that aren't like the brightest highlights. Continuing to add some shadow down here. Going to go in with the tissue and just blend a bit more. Do want to go back in with the 8B just around this point because it's not that light. And it is definitely darker on the other side, on this side. Okay, adding a final little bit of the 8B. Still adding that snow. So now I'm happy with that. Now we just need to move on to working on the background. Not got much left to do. The background's going to be quite easy and simple to do. So let's move on to the background, which I'm going to be doing in the next part. So I hope you enjoyed this part and enjoyed learning how I would draw the fur cloak. And we'll be adding the other little bits of snow onto this later on. Just add in some more snow. Wipe away the bits. So I'll see you guys in the final part where we'll be working on the background. Bye guys.